All right, cool. I got to move this box around a little bit here. Okay. Well, you don't want to see that. We'll see this over here. Okay. So this is a presentation that I put together after meeting Jen on LinkedIn a couple months ago, and she's so gracious to invite me to your roundtable, and I'm excited to be here. My big how did you phrase it? Big success, big win is being in this meeting right now with all of you. So thank you again. Um, so this presentation should last about 15 to 17 minutes, and it's cybersecurity for the C-level executives. And it's not going to be a technical presentation. It's going to be more about guiding principles and so forth. Now, all of you as COOs, fractional COOs, you probably have or you will have IT people, an IT person, IT staff, or maybe various IT vendors reporting to you. And so my purpose here is not to advocate for any particular vendor or solution. Is just to present a set of guiding principles that anyone can follow. It's not again, it's not a technical presentation, and I'm not a technical person either. Well, we'll get into it in a minute. So here's our agenda for the next few minutes. I'm just going to talk about myself and what I'm doing as a business. We're going to talk about the scope of the problem, security framework, and so forth. And then I guess, Jen, if there's time, we can have some Q&A.
Sounds great.
So let's get into just a little bit about my story. I began my IT career in 1995, and I was buying and selling reconditioned IBM mid-range and mainframe computer equipment. So I'm talking about the disk drives that are the size of refrigerators and tape backup systems with reel-to-reel on them and stuff like that. And but back then it was easy because the customers always knew more than we had to. But things have really flipped around now. So my last two jobs were as a virtual CIO. So this is a role that in a managed services company, an IT outsourcing company, that's basically like a combination of being an account manager and also a consultant to help people identify their IT needs and come up with a roadmap for them and so forth. But now I'm independent, so I don't work for anybody but you folks. And so my job now is to meet with business owners and executives to learn about their company and their IT needs. And then I invite in one or more partners from my portfolio of over 200 vetted top tier service providers to resolve their issues. I charge typically zero for my services. So this is a free service to all of you. And your IT matchmaker, I have to credit one of my clients for coming up with that name. She said, Michael, you're kind of like an IT matchmaker. And I said, bing. And so then I bought the URL and I was off to the races. So moving on, let's talk about the scope of the problem here. So these days, I would say that it's these two at the top that are really, you guys can see my laser pointer there.
Yep.
It's these two at the top that are really the threat these days. And I think it's fair to say that they've sort of merged now, right? I mean, now we have state-sponsored countries being involved in organized crime, and it's mostly Russia-based, frankly. I mean, hacktivists and individuals, this is kind of the old way of thinking it. The threat landscape has just, over the last 5 years, it's just escalated way beyond what it was in the past 25 years before that. I mean, we used to think that having an antivirus and you're fine. It's way worse than that now. Because now people are trying to steal your data and steal your money. It's doubly bad. So let me give you some stats on the scope of the problem. Ransomware is the #1 cybersecurity threat today. And it is an external threat. So we're not talking about disgruntled employees. That's a whole other topic. But here are some stats. So I spoke to we're basically in like a ransomware pandemic now, and we just have to adjust to the new reality of that the old solutions were just no longer sufficient. So I did speak with an expert who specializes in ransomware recovery. And when I say expert, I mean for real. This guy has He's been involved in about 200 ransomware rescues operations just in the last few years. And so these stats come from him, and I actually confirmed them all yesterday with one of his colleagues. So this is all real. 99% of the business owners were surprised by the attack and thought they were protected. In fact, most thought they were already paying too much for cybersecurity. So I wonder where they got that idea. But anyway, the next thing is even more terrible. And that is that more than a handful of these victims were victimized a second time. And that's because after the trauma of the ransomware recovery and spending all that money and getting a whole roadmap of list of things to do to protect themselves going forward, they made some poor business decisions about which order they should do these things in. And the most important things that they were supposed to do, they still listed as bullet points on this plan. But I think you all know that having to-do items listed on a sheet with bullet points is not the same as actually executing on those bullet points. So it's shocking and sad, frankly. So the next thing is this is one of the questions that Jen asked at the top. What is the average cost? So if you guess $300,000, that is correct. And that does not include the entire scope of the disaster. This is just the professional services to recover. Now, there was one of the answers in that list was $1 million, and actually that I think got the most votes, if I'm not mistaken, Jen. So if you were to count like the entire thing, hiring the lawyers, sending out the free credit monitoring for a year, postage, paying the ransom, and so forth, that $300,000 represents about 1/3 to 1/4 of the total cost of the disaster. That does not include, by the way, loss of reputation. If you're a public company and your stock price went down, I mean, it doesn't calculate things like that, or like people who it's like, well, I'll never do business with them again because they got hacked, or there's no way to account for all that. But the $300,000 is just for the recovery itself. So let's move on to the next slide here. I'm going to talk about the security framework. This is probably the biggest thing I can say is that you really have to assume the breach. We can put all sorts of protective measures in there. And these are what I like to call the generally accepted security practices, GASP for short, GASP. I don't know, I just came up with that. So it starts with normally what we think of as protect, to protect our data, but it really starts with identifying what it is that you need to protect. So, and that includes your physical assets and your digital assets, and prioritizing what's more important to protect than other things. I mean, it might be more important to protect your executive compensation package than, let's say, some marketing slicks that are being, developed by the marketing department. I mean, it's all important, of course, to protect, but maybe one is more important than the other. So that's identifying. Protecting, okay, this kind of goes without saying. I think that's what we all think of when we talk about cybersecurity, so I won't go too much into that. But the last three are super important because detect and respond and recover, you have to assume that the bad guys will get in somehow. Because people make mistakes. Sometimes people will click on a link they're not supposed to. Sometimes the system wasn't patched, within, soon enough after the patch was released, or things like that. So here's why this is all important, because if and when, or I should say when the bad guys do get in, you need to have the tools in place to mitigate the damage and to be able to recover from it. And also really important is you need to know exactly what the bad guys did when they were mucking around in your system. Unfortunately, encrypting your data and asking for a ransom is often what I would call the parting gift from the criminals. Usually they've been in your environment for a month or more, stealing all your data, and then on the way out they say, they give you the finger and set up a ransom to try and get more money out of you than they already stole. Because they're going to take the data that they stole and sell it on the black market. So you really need to know what it is that they did, and that's part of the detect and respond thing. You want to be able to know what they did, because it's going to make a big difference if you can prove by looking at log files that, okay, they're claiming that they stole 200,000 records, but now that I go in and see, they only really touched 237 of them. So how many letters do you want to have to send out to your customers? 200,000 or 237? So that's really important to know what the hackers did once they got in. So that's why all of these layers are important. Okay, so moving on. The best practice is to take a layered approach. So we often talk about, people. I think, and I will highlight a specific solution here, not the name of the company, but specific solution, and that is cybersecurity awareness training, because technology can and will fail at some point. Um, People are really can be your first line of defense and also your last line of defense if the technology fails. So um, it's probably the least expensive and most highly impactful, one of the most highly impactful things you can do. And it's usually these things are like it's like a self-paced online training, and then they follow up with weekly quizzes and little tidbits about ongoing security threats and what to watch out for. And if you can keep somebody from clicking on that link that allows the bad guys in, that is a huge win. Now, as far as policies, process, and governance, this is not something that you want to just leave up to the IT department or the IT company. Decisions about IT policies, whether it's acceptable use policies or the way that certain policies are enforced with the technology that you have, whatever that might be, firewalls, security software, blah blah blah. Those decisions need to be made with including the highest levels of the company, executives and board members, because after all, you don't have a limitless amount of money to spend on security. That money is finite, no matter how big the company is. And so decisions are going to have to be made about what's important, what needs protecting, and so forth. So you don't want to just let the IT people make the decisions. It needs to be, in other words, you guys are the COOs. You need to be involved in those decisions, in my opinion. Some examples of technology. There's its own set of layers within technology. We kind of covered that a little bit, before, but we're talking about hardware examples are firewalls, backup and recovery appliances and solutions, antivirus software, automated detection and response solutions. I mean, I could fill up 3 hours with just that information. And in fact, if any of you guys have questions, you can call me offline. We can talk about it. So let's see where we are next. So I can give you right now, I'm going to give you some action items. Okay. Here we go. So short term, it's best to hire an outside firm to conduct a security risk assessment. For example, you wouldn't have your own bookkeeper audit your own books. You would have somebody from outside the company do that for obvious reasons. And it's the same thing. It's not to say that IT people are going to be cagey and they're not going to be honest about what they've deployed and what they haven't and what the risks are and so forth. It's just that you need another set of eyes on the thing. Even the best IT people. I mean, when I worked for IT companies, we had other IT companies come in and audit us. Just to give you a good example, we don't even trust our own. We didn't even trust our own people to that level. So that's recommended. And we call it security risk assessment, or an SRA. If you hear people talking about SRA, that's what it refers to. Another thing to do, if your clients don't already have cybersecurity insurance, of course they should. And the actual process of applying for the cybersecurity insurance is a big education on its own. Because the last time I saw one of these applications, it's pretty in depth. I mean, it was like a dozen pages and lots of questions about really in the weeds about what cybersecurity solutions you have in place. So let's say for some reason you can't, or your client doesn't want to have an outside company do it. I mean, just the rigors of going through an application for cybersecurity insurance, that's going to be an eye opener. I will also give you an immediate not just short term, but an immediate term. If your clients are not using multi-factor authentication for all remote access and all admin functions, you got to have whoever's running IT now to turn that on right away. So multi-factor authentication, I think most of us know what that means, but technically, multi-factor, we typically think of three factors when we're talking about authentication. There's um, something you are, something you have, and something you know. Okay. So usually we're only dealing with two of those. So something you know is a password. Something you have is your phone with with this code on it. You know, you either get a text message or you have an app on your phone, you know, with a you know, like a what's it called? The authenticator apps. Yeah. So that needs to be turned on right away. But it's also important to keep in mind that there is no silver bullet. The best approach again is a layered approach. I've had clients over the years where they're like, well, Michael, do I really need this thing here because I already have this thing here and there's a bit of overlap between the two. Which one should I get? And I said, well, you know, spend the money, spend whatever you can afford, but it's best to have multiple layers. Just because you have a firewall doesn't mean you don't need antivirus. And I could go down the list of all the security measures that you could take, but you don't want to just rely on one layer. In fact, that's what the training is. It's kind of like a backup layer. And the good news is you don't need to hire a whole team of people to do this. I mean, what I do is I can, let me back up a second. Security services in particular are the marketplace for IT services has matured to the point where this can be outsourced. You can have, you know, a company doing managed backup and recovery for you. You can have a company doing managed firewall. You don't even have to buy the firewall. They'll actually install it and manage it for you. And on down the list. Even upmarket solutions like having a security operations center that's literally looking at screens and seeing all the flares going up and reporting to you about activity and who's trying to get into your network from Estonia, Nigeria, Russia, and North Korea. You know, I mean, that's important stuff, and it can all be outsourced. In fact, probably third of the companies in my portfolio offer that type of service. So with that, we could just wrap it up. I'll say that reminder that security is an ongoing business endeavor. It's not a one-time project. It needs to be revisited on a regular basis. Policy should drive the requirements, not the technology. I once had a client ask me, this is back, 10, 15 years ago. He goes, I need a backup solution. And I said, well, all right, well, what is your recovery time objective and what is your recovery point objective? In other words, how soon do you need to be back up and running and how much data do you need to, can you do without? Like, do you want to have to re-enter 15 minutes worth of data or a week? You know, and he couldn't answer those questions. And I'm like, well, if you can't answer those questions, then it's going to cost between $5,000 and $85,000 because there's a big difference between being up and running, back up and running in 15 minutes versus being back up and running in 5 days. You know, that the costs are way different. And again, I would propose to you that IT is driven by strategy that must include, of course, the IT professionals that you work with, whether they're employees or part of a company that you've hired, and the various business units and executive leadership. It's basically all the stakeholders need to be involved at some point. Now, it doesn't mean that the owner of the company has to be involved in exact settings and the technology. That's not what I'm talking about. But I'm talking about setting priorities and the most important thing. So with that, I want to say thank you. That's my contact information there on the last slide. Youritmatchmaker.com. I just filed for my fictitious business name about a month ago, so I'm proud of it and I'm putting it out there.